This channel is part of the History Hits network.
Each California Channel Island has its own heartbeat. Each island has its own dynamic, its own size, its own orientation, its own very intimate personal history.
Well, this is the final frontier of our continent, at any rate.
There's 8 islands off the coast of California. The 4 northerly ones are kind of in a line just off of Santa Barbara here.
The southern 4 islands are more widely scattered, but to just say that they're a group of islands is to completely misrepresent what they are. They are the trace of a vanished world.
I do this interview with a little hesitation, and I'm a little nervous about what we're doing here. If you love this island, for God's sakes, don't come here.
Some days the islands look as though you can touch them. They're so close, but unpredictable weather out here can change that, and it has caused many people to lose their vessels, lose their lives in some cases.
The oceans around the islands are unlike the mainland ocean. They're remote, they're hard to access.
I kind of think of our California Channel Islands as our North American equivalent of the Galapagos.
I coined this phrase and I say it today. Hi, this is Channel Islands National Park. This is the greatest national park in America, and that's what it is.
I've been living here for 22 years, within sight of the islands. Although I've written many books in this house, I often wondered what goes on out there.
What does it all mean? It's the history of our species, you know. We're studying human behavior at different time periods and the different challenges that human beings faced in the past.
When people look across the horizon and see the Channel Islands, they are nothing other than a silhouette out on the ocean. But once one has stepped on just one island, you can never look at the island with the same eyes again.
I would love to be able to tell a story fully in my language, but unfortunately, my great-grandfather told my father, "Why do you need to learn the language? There's nobody left. Who are you going to talk to?" So I start with Sahipaka, once upon a time.
Most days, the Channel Islands sit in plain view of millions of people along the California coast. Hardly anyone can tell you their names, let alone what the natives called them long before. After the native people were all gone from California's Channel Islands, generations of ranchers and fishermen, sportsmen, and even the military transformed them to suit their own purposes. Eventually, it all took its toll. And then some people who loved these islands looked around and realized what had happened to them. And they asked, what had they been like before? And what could they become again? Shower down on some blue bayou with a bamboo pole stuck in the sand. But the road I'm on don't seem to go. Early in the game, I decided this was a wonderful place, and I would do everything in my power to keep it like it is. Wish I enjoyed. There are powers that be that are much greater than me. But I kind of promised Dr. Stanton that I would try and have his back after he was gone. And I'm doing pretty good.
History Hit is like Netflix, just for history fans, with exclusive history documentaries covering some of the most famous people and events in history, just for you. Whether you're looking to dive into life and crime in Victorian London, or the forgotten history that deserves to be heard, History Hit has a documentary for you, just a click away. We're committed to bringing history fans award-winning documentaries and podcasts that you can't find anywhere else. Sign up now for a free trial, and Absolute History fans get 50% off their first 3 months. Just be sure to use the code AbsoluteHistory at checkout.
I just dream and keep on being the way I am.
This is the island of Santa Cruz. It lies in the Pacific, only a few miles from one of the most densely populated areas in the United States. Its 62,000 acres of peaks and valleys stretch for 21 miles, making it the largest of the 8 Channel Islands.
Santa Cruz Island is said to have received its name in 1769 during the expedition of Gaspar de Portola. The Spanish sailed out to the island, and after a ritual exchange of gifts with the Chumash elders, it was discovered that they had left behind a wooden staff topped by an iron cross. For the Chumash, iron was highly prized. Nevertheless, they rowed out in their tomals the next day to... Justinian Care visited Santa Cruz Island for the first time and was so struck by the possibilities that he began a 20-year building program to create his vision of a California ranch that would combine sheep, wool, cattle, and wine.
At the top of his wine production, he had over 200 acres planted here on the island. The biggest year of production was 95,000 gallons.
Perhaps the capstone was a small family chapel located in a corner of the vineyard.
The pastoral community blossomed quietly for a time, then fell victim to a rapidly changing world, which included the noble experiment, prohibition, and the Depression.
In the years immediately following Justinian Care's death, his children tried to carry on the successful enterprise. As the siblings worked together, they uncovered certain differences they had.
The litigation lasted 20 years.
And the costs that they had to bear because of the litigation required that they put it up for sale. It took them 5 years to find a buyer, and they finally found one, the Los Angeles oil man and industrialist Edwin Stanton.
Well, when Stanton took over in 1937, one of the first things he decided was that he didn't want to be in the wine business, and he ended up draining the vats. He said that was a tough day for the workers to see the wine drain down the road.
I had just graduated from UCSB in anthropology, and my major professor asked me to participate in an archaeological dig. I was down at the ranch, and this diminutive man came walking out of his office, and he said, "You, there, come here, come in, sit." And I thought, oh my, that's the man who owns the island. That's Cary Stanton.
And there's quite a mythology about him. He was very standoffish. You know, he ran this island like a little kingdom.
I always got along with Cary. I was well aware that he was pretty volatile.
Well, Cary Stanton was one of the greatest characters I've ever met. He was the Damon Runyon character, if you wanted to make an application.
He was meticulously Victorian, very proper, and attention to detail. Wool just straight across.
He told me he had a collection of rare books and art, and I said, may I catalog it for you? That worked into my becoming his personal assistant for the next 17 years. He was graduated from Stanford. He was a medical doctor, a pathologist. He dealt with the dead, not the living.
When was it that you decided to give up an active participation in medicine and make your life on this island?
I returned here in 1957. I am the only surviving child of my parents.
He was the second son born to Edwin and Evelyn Stanton, and his older brother was killed in World War II. And it was, in fact, his older brother who was expected to be the heir to the island. It was my son, the rancher, my son, the doctor. Well, the doctor ended up inheriting the island.
And I felt it was very important that someone be here to take care of the island protect the island, and also, I must say, I am very fond of the life. I love living on the island.
It wasn't, you know, here's this big island that I own. He was a hands-on, even though he was the last person you would mistake for a cattle rancher.
So Cary transferred his knowledge of medicine to doctoring the cattle, was at all of the roundups. He administered all of the orders for the branding and the ear marking.
You didn't dare tell him you were going to go on a trip someplace and you needed to have some kind of a vaccination, because the next minute he'd be right there with his needle in his hand saying, bend over and drop your trousers.
Legend has it he was quite the eccentric. Threw fabulous parties out on the islands.
There have been quite a few guests that would come out and have dinner at the ranch. Joe Walsh was one of them. Richard Diebenkorn, one of the most famous California artists.
My father and Cary met at a fraternity at Stanford University in the early 1940s, and I think became friends right away and were then lifelong friends. Then there was this serendipity. Cary Stanton, on the one hand, had this unbelievable, extraordinary island, and my father turned out to have quite a remarkable career as an artist and a painter. The tradition that he was in was pretty much that the individual painting or drawing was a standalone thing in and of itself. And this is not true of the works on the island. They form a body of work that document a friendship.
I got fascinated with the fact that there was, first of all, a chapel on the island. Nobody knew that. So I wrote a letter and I asked him, could I come out sometime to the island and say Mass in the chapel? And there was no answer.
Stanton was a little put off in the initial approach.
The lady knocked on the door during one of the classes. She says, there's a man on the phone who has to talk to you right now. And I said, good morning. Father Weber speaking. Stanton here. I'm going to ask you a question, Father. What do you want to say Mass on my island for? After about 10 minutes, he said, all right, you can come out on the island. You come on the 3rd of May. And I said, 3rd of May. Yes, aren't you a Catholic? And I said, of course I am. He said, that's the Feast of the Holy Cross, Santa Cruz. You can come out on the 3rd of May. I didn't even say goodbye, I slammed up the phone. The conversation was finished. If you've been out there by plane, you land on a fire break going up the side of a mountain. Sitting in a Jeep, over the side was Cary Stanton. We introduced ourselves. Immediately, our chemistry was very close. We just sort of, I think, at least I did, I thought I'm going to like this guy with all of his foibles, and he had foibles.
Those older days and genteel ways were preserved by Stanton in his island seclusion.
8:15 or so, he would ring the bell. The maid or butler would come in,
and he told me, Marla, when you're on an island, it could be so easy to become a slob.
He always dressed for dinner, and every Sunday he devoted 4 hours to winding his clocks.
He would walk around the house with a radio beeping Greenwich time, and he lived in an atmosphere of ticking, chiming clocks.
One of my friends owned a music store in Santa Barbara. My friend's girlfriend was Marla.
And I invited Joe to come to Santa Cruz Island with me, and I introduced them to Cary Stanton.
When I first met Joe, he was still heavily involved in kind of the wild, crazy rock and roll world, you know, altered states of mind and drinking and whatever.
And I warned Joe, no crazy rock and roll hippie clothes, that he had to be on good behavior.
There was a testing period. If he didn't have any use for somebody, they didn't get invited to the island. And so I had to try out to see if I passed the island test.
And I should add that this was coat and tie, dress for dinner. I was expected to wear stockings, heels, and a dress on this remote, rugged island west of the West.
Then after dinner, back in here for a half hour of pleasant chatting, and then lights out. And by 9:30, the island went dark, and everybody was in bed because, unbeknownst to me, we got up at 5. He threw Barry Goldwater off the island, so I did pretty good. I got to stay the evening.
Who knows why people clicked? I think Cary was fascinated with the fact that this man was a famous musician. Cary only knew about the opera and the theater.
And over a period of time, I got to know him and the way he did things. And he and Henry Duffield, who were the ranch manager, felt comfortable around me, and I got invited back a lot and was kind of carefully taught stuff about the island and how it was run and what it likes.
Well, I think it's a beautiful place, and I've always been interested in land management and improving land all the time and preserving it as it is.
He wanted to do one thing in life, and he did it very well. He wanted to preserve the island in the way it was when he took it over.
The beaches are the dirtiest place on this island. I know an awful lot of yachtsmen, and I'm appalled that they consider the ocean a garbage pail.
He pulled into a cove and found a very large bag of trash. He went through it. Rotten food, coffee grounds, banana peels, and mail. He got the name and address. He flew that hefty bag of trash off the island. He walked into the yacht broker's office, took the hefty bag of trash.
Very politely dumped it on top of the broker's desk and said, "I believe you left this on my island."
There's something about the island that it's so special that people just have such a passion for it. And one of those passions is the passion to control and to dominate it. There's a passion to preserve it.
Dr. Stanton at one point started to think about life after Dr. Stanton and what would happen to Santa Cruz Island.
He turned down a number of very lucrative offers to turn the island into a Disneyland or something like that.
The oil companies offered him a blank check. A blank check, I mean, fill in the amount. We don't care. And he said, nah, I'd rather have the island. He wanted it not to change.
In the mid-1970s, Cary Stanton approached the Nature Conservancy to purchase and to protect Santa Cruz Island.
Well, it's a very complicated agreement, but assuming that the Conservancy raises the money to exercise its option, they will take title to approximately 12,000 acres on the north side of the island and have a conservation easement over the remainder of this ranch.
When I found that's what he wanted to do, I arranged for the Eagles to do matched that, and it was a sizable amount of money.
To a concert at the Forum, and his worst fears were realized as 17,000 people started stomping their feet.
He really thought he was going to die. And it was just a regular concert. The guy next to him handed him a big joint, and it was so loud he had Kleenex sticking out of his ears, so he looked like a madman.
After all of the encores, the car doors were opened. We got in. Several girls broke through the tape, got onto the hood of the car, lifted their shirts, pressed their naked bodies against the windshield, and Joe, he sank down and he looked over at Cary and he said, "I'm sorry." And Cary said, "This is your world."
He told that story from then on. About the night he almost died at an Eagles concert. So I guess he liked it.
By 1978, the Nature Conservancy had purchased 90% of Santa Cruz Island for roughly $2.5 million.
I don't know what it was worth, but he didn't care about the money. He wanted to preserve the island.
It's particularly rewarding to see little children come out here who've never been to a place like this, and they find out that it isn't all paving and making money. There's a whole lot of stuff that is already here that I guess you could say God gave us, that's very easy to destroy, but somewhat more difficult to keep.
I came to realize what this is And what a wonderful place it is. The one thing that I latched on to that I can put my arms around and wrap my mind around is the well-being of this island. And so I decided that's what I would do. That was my one thing.
I think our basic viewpoint about the island is what holds us together. The island is unique. Even among the islands, it's unique. I think that's the bond that I have with Joe, and perhaps it's the same way with you.
This year we commemorate, and it's our 47th celebration of this annual Mass. It's a tradition that was started by Cary Stanton in 1968.
I couldn't believe it, because I just had such a good time out there. I thought, golly, I get to go back every year, and I did. I went back for 44 years.
It's just mutated into what it is. All of the old family of the island, friends of Stanton, the Cares, anybody who has anything to do with the island, we get them out here once a year. And it's a tradition, and it's what I'm all about. Nothing changes. And this is my 27th year.
When the Eagles each year go to make up their schedule, what comes first? Santa Cruz Island.
You bet. I don't. Have you ever heard an Eagles song? Maybe once.
Are you kidding? California Hotel. I remember that. The only thing I remember, California Hotel. There's the Hotel California.
Hotel California.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. For the first couple of years to Monsignor, we hadn't really gotten used to what we were doing. We were kind of winging it. If the priest starts flapping at the mouth, we start playing something because it's hot out there. Bang this out real quick. We do have two other relics out there, Carrie and Henry. I used to play for them in the living room, and I would pour my heart out to them, and Henry would say, "Play something we like." It's one of my main things, spiritually. If there is a God, he hangs out on this island a lot. The Chumash creation myth is that life started here. And God made a rainbow, and man walked to the mainland. It's an honor and a privilege that this came into my life. It's part of my awareness that is extremely grounding. So spiritually, it's a driving force. I come here a lot in my head in times of mental turmoil. I just come here and everything is okay.
Well, it's an interesting story because we found it not looking for it, like sometimes happens.
A few years ago, we were working on San Nicolas Island, explicitly looking for really ancient sites, 10,000, 12,000-year-old sites.
We were out looking at old soils. We were looking for the earliest evidence of human occupation.
This was sort of a different way of doing archaeology because the really big, obvious.
And I see John, and John has this smirk on his face, and he's doing one of these with his fingers for me to come where he is. And I go, oh no, what did he find now?
I thought it was a fossil, and I thought, you know, that's pretty cool. It looks like a whale fossil. So I climbed down the cliff to look at it, and underneath it was the edge of a redwood box. And one side had already fallen off, and so the contents of the redwood box were exposed. And I could see some shiny things in there. It was sort of in the shade, but I reached in and I pulled out an object, and it was a piece of carved soapstone, an effigy, an unusual object. I reached in and pulled out another shiny object, and it was a piece of old green bottle glass. And then I reached in and I pulled out one more, and it was a copper button, a very old copper button.
So we knew we weren't looking at anything very early, but something probably historical.
And at that point I realized, like, you know, stop pulling things out of the box.
But it was also in an area that the rain travels through, and it was receiving a whole bunch of erosion.
These objects were not going to make it through the winter.
It was actually raining that day.
We just stopped what we were doing and decided we'd better salvage these boxes.
There was a feeling of euphoria when we discover it, but almost a feeling of dread when we figured out what we had to do in a short time frame, and that if we blew it, we were blowing it not only for ourselves, but perhaps for all of humankind, perhaps for everybody interested in the Channel Islands, and certainly Native peoples. So we felt this overwhelming responsibility to get it done right.
And the only thing we had time to do under that circumstance was to expose them, map them, and we took a metal sign, slipped it under the one box, and dropped it into a banker's box.
We decided only to extract them whole and then take them back to the laboratory for further excavation.
We were extraordinarily excited. You have to understand that I'm Norwegian mostly, and my granddad's name was Old Stoneface, so we're not as emotional as some people. So I wasn't jumping up and down or screaming, but we were very excited. Even in the field, we had some sense of the magnitude of the discovery, but the true magnitude only emerged in the lab.
I wasn't there for the removal of the boxes from the cliff faces, but I was really lucky to be there as the tops were being lifted off of the boxes.
During the excavations, this was a constant feeling of euphoria because every time I moved soil off, an incredible discovery was found.
The mood was tense and very, very exciting because it seemed like one thing kept popping out after another.
I mean, I was able to excavate a jewelry box. Oh gosh. Oh God. Oh. I was able to excavate these ornately carved fish hooks.
There was an abalone shell with tons of jewelry.
Multiple times where I would just lean back in disbelief of what we were doing.
We were in constant state of surprise and shock that there was more stuff, and it was even more interesting than the last thing we found. There were glass beads, glass arrowheads.
A bunch of the points that are in the redwood box cache are made from the curve of these kinds of bottles. One of the pieces has a side seam and a general shape that puts it as a Hamilton mineral water bottle, which only began being produced by about 1809.
We had whistles, we had knives that were still hafted with redwood handles, we had brass buttons, we had all kinds of things.
We knew that we were touching and taking things out that somebody had painstakingly put in there, something that somebody had made and placed in the box and gone to a lot of trouble to hide away.
So there was a mix of historic objects and Native American Nicoleño objects. There was a bone harpoon, and it's a distinctive type of harpoon that's known as a toggling harpoon, and it is not a Nicoleño toggling harpoon. Since I've worked in Alaska, I know a lot about Alaskan hunting technologies. It was very clearly from Alaska, one of the coastal tribes, and that was an extraordinary moment for me. I had this link from working in Alaska and the Channel Islands. We've known for years that Aleuts and Koniag peoples were brought down by the Russians to hunt sea otters.
So what we would expect Southern California, Los Angeles, and the Channel Islands to be during the late 1800s, people from all over the world coming together for economy, for society, and so on.
In the early days of archaeology or antiquarianism, there were several of these toggling harpoons picked up, and they're now in museum collections. But not one of them had ever come from a known site. And here we had, in boxes, Russian artifacts with European goods and Nicoleño material. So that was, truly one of those very rare moments of discovery that I can count maybe on one hand that have happened in my career.
So now the big question is, who stashed these redwood boxes so long ago? Well, if you just look at the stuff in the boxes themselves, there was a pipe with a wad of tobacco that was smoked in the pipe. There were basic implements for hunting.
200 plus artifacts. We think it's quite probable that those were cash boxes that were being stored and hidden, basically.
If you just look at those things, then maybe you could think a hunter, a relic collector many years ago, put it in there. But when we found those baskets, we know that only a native Nicoleño can make those things. We knew that the person who made those grew up on San Nicolas Island, knew how to work with seagrass cordage, knew how to twine it in such a way and then take asphaltum to make it watertight. That was a very, very difficult thing to do. We think that the assortment of goods represents a time period probably when this individual was born. Who was born in the early 1800s? Juana Maria.
Juana Maria is always in our thoughts when we're doing any type of excavation on the island at all, and especially in this case,
Juana Maria, the lone woman of San Nicolas Island, or the person that was chronicled as Corona in Island of the Blue Dolphins. A person that over 100 years ago was talked about all across the world because she lived alone on San Nicolas Island for 18 years.
When she was really discovered by Nidever, she had cached materials around the island.
You would do that too if you lived alone. You would have a place in the northwest coast where you had tools and implements and water. That's how you could survive alone.
I definitely think that Juana Maria could have been the one to collect all of these items.
Things that were needed, things that were her artistry, things that kind of encompassed your life as a whole.
Did she smoke tobacco frequently? Or was that tobacco left merely as an offering? There were whistles there. Were these whistles for hunting, or did she play music to keep herself occupied?
There was a feeling of, this is my life, all in this box, and I need to keep it safe. And so in that sense, it's not so much of a sadness, but more of a survival and a struggle, and also a deep caring for the items that you're making and you're storing for later.
For somebody who is passionate about understanding the native past, this story is one of great emotion.
The further we went in those 2 days of excavation, the more and more me personally, and I'm sure the other people that were in the room, could feel her presence increasing as we went.
This story is very sad, obviously. But when Nidever first surrounded her in the original accounts, what's great about it is it makes our work alive. Because it talks about her, what she carried. It talks about a basket she had. It talks about her making a water bottle. We found all these things in the archaeological record. So it brings all of this 20 years or more of painstaking, meticulous archaeological work, and it becomes real when we can see it manifested into the story of perhaps the most famous Southern California native person.
The Conservancy would like to see Santa Cruz Island return to its natural state. That means the removal of wild pigs, sheep, and eventually cattle, all introduced to the island with the arrival of European ranchers.
They don't belong on a nature preserve. They're causing incredible destruction on the island, basically ruining the natural system, the habitat for other plant species and animal species that are native and belong on the preserve.
As an artist, it's not my job to take sides. It's my job to present both sides. What drew me to this restoration project was the controversy over removing the invasive species on the island. The moral imperative. Who's in charge? Who plays God? What animals are privileged and which ones need to be eliminated? For When the Killing's Done, my first novel about the Channel Islands, it was obviously the idea of the rat savior, the animal activist who went out to Anacapa Island just after the Park Service was going to bomb the island with their rat poison, and threw vitamin K all over the island as the antidote to protect the rats. The antagonist of that book, Dave LaJoy, is by any accounts an obnoxious human being. However, he has one principle that is unshakable: thou shalt not kill. It illustrates the problems with regard to what is an invasive species and what is not. For instance, those rats, which came from the wreck of the Winfield Scott paddle steamer, they constitute a distinct subspecies that is inbred for 150 years. Now, should they be eliminated or should they be preserved? I'll answer my own question. They need to be eliminated. The reason being, there are rats everywhere, and rats are the chief problem with invasive species on islands in particular.
The protagonist in T.C. Boyle's book, When the Killing's Done, is a woman by the name of Alma, who is deeply committed to the preservation and protection of Santa Cruz Island. And in a lot of ways, Alma and I share that deep commitment. When I first came to work on Santa Cruz Island, I was daunted by the challenges that lay ahead. The removal of thousands of feral pigs, to being able to make sure that the island foxes didn't go extinct, to also being able to restore a lot of the island's native plant species that were out here.
I first came to Santa Cruz Island in 1965. My early work was with the island fox. At that time, this population was very healthy, very abundant. All of a sudden, in the late 90s, we realized that the population had started to decline.
Bald eagles disappeared from the Channel Islands starting in about the late 1940s as DDT was produced in the U.S.
It cycled into the marine environment and moved up the food chain, and it basically inhibited the ability of the birds to lay down adequate calcium on their eggs, and it caused reproductive failure in their populations because they would crush their eggs when they'd sit on them.
And by the late 1950s, early 1960s, they were all gone from the Channel Islands.
Feral pigs not only had a devastating impact on the ancient Chumash archaeological sites here on the island, but they also created widespread erosion and proliferated the growth of invasive weeds. They also enabled the establishment and colonization of another non-native species on Santa Cruz Island, and that was the golden eagle.
They're out in the daytime, they rely on plant fruits and insects a lot, so they don't have to constrain their activities to nighttime.
The foxes never saw them coming, and the golden eagles picked them off like popcorn.
Anytime you do ecological restoration, people take sides and they think you're picking good species over bad species. We were trying to keep the pieces of the Channel Islands, those things that were native to the Channel Islands, from disappearing. And if you value the natural resources that evolved on this island, then sometimes you have to take different measures to save them.
And what we did, we implemented a multifaceted restoration program that focused on saving the island fox, that focused on restoring the native habitats, involved taking a handful of foxes and bred them in captivity. We live captured golden eagles. We did all kinds of crazy things to try and do that.
The golden eagle's a great example. There was a way to capture golden eagles and relocate them into places in California. The pig was not an easy task.
There's nothing pleasant about having to kill or remove animals.
With the pigs, the controversy was they had to be shot in place and left there to rot. The reason being, God knows what sort of diseases they might have germinated within them that could come and just devastate the hogs of America and the mainland.
We contracted with a team of about 15 conservation professionals from New Zealand.
When I first got to Santa Cruz, just everywhere you looked, there was pigs, basically. And I thought, how the hell are we ever going to do this? But realistically, what it was taking Santa Cruz, which is, 62,000 acres, dividing it into day-sized chunks.
The pig hunters were very professional in their approach to removing pigs, and very methodical and strategic.
What bothered me was the manner in which they proposed to kill off the pigs. There may be other options that were more humane.
In terms of practicality of actually doing the pig eradication, it was actually extremely challenging. I think the only thing that made it work was us having a helicopter there. I think if you tried to do that on the ground, we'd still be there.
They were going to be shooting the pigs from helicopters, use dogs trained to track down the pigs and piglets. It sounded like Armageddon.
There was a very small but very vocal opposition.
I made the front page of the Santa Barbara News Press in the Hall of Shame.
And that's when the government rose up to really protest against the protest. And we didn't like that, so we went to war.
So although people would say you were eradicating the pig or you were killing the pigs, I would like to say is no, we were actually saving the fox.
There were numerous lawsuits.
We had standing to sue the federal government in federal district court, which is exactly what we did.
We had our tires slashed. We received hate mail and death threats.
Getting the project done was really critical to a way bigger project, the restoration of Santa Cruz Island.
They reacted much more quickly than anybody imagined they could. I guess the government can move quickly at times.
And I think that's why they sort of bent over backwards to make sure that we weren't interrupted and we could do what we were good at doing and they could do what they were good at doing as well.
And the court concluded, rightly so, that it was a moot issue because it was already done.
In 1980, we began restoring bald eagles to Catalina Island. We had our first breeding in about 1987, but the eggs broke in the nest. We managed to get into the nest and get some of the egg remains and found that they had very high levels of DDE. So beginning in 1989, we actually started removing all the eggs from the nest as soon as they were laid. We'd replace them with artificial eggs, which the adults would continue to incubate, and we would take the other eggs up to the San Francisco Zoo. They'd try to hatch them, and then we would bring chicks back down and just foster them into the nest and let the adults raise them that way.
There's been a whole level of conservation efforts that have gone into recovering those populations and bringing them back as breeders onto the islands. But the resource managing agencies said, well, what if we reintroduce bald eagles back onto the islands and they eat island foxes just like golden eagles are eating island foxes? I said, well, one way to look at that is let's go back to one of these historic bald eagle nests on the Channel Islands. We had 10 island fox bones out of 10,000 faunal elements. So what did that tell us? You don't have to worry if you're going to reintroduce bald eagles back onto the islands, they're not going to be killing island fox.
The public response to our restoration work is incredible. We've managed to set live webcams on some of our nests. We've got a huge following of people that will watch these nests throughout the day. One of our viewers from New York actually called us up and said, these chicks were just knocked out of the nest, attacked. One had a hole in its beak and one had a broken wing. We were able to recover the chicks, get them to the mainland for rehabilitation, bring them back out and release them.
My wife and I were privileged to be there when the first 2 eagle chicks hatched on the island were released. Chicks, these things have claws the size of your hands, and it is a mighty impressive and wonderful thing.
And now we have about a dozen adult pairs on the northern Channel Islands. Most of those are successfully producing chicks on their own.
This is Cochise Prietos Beach, and it's one of my favorite beaches. You can see these little fox footprints here, and they lead up to these weed lines where they'll find some crabs, which is so fun for me to see because when I first started coming out to the island, there were no foxes here.
It's just really amazing, really right in your face, obvious that you can see things have happened for the good. Plants are coming back, the island foxes are alive and well.
It's nice now that all has been said and done that I can point to what I think is a good result, if you will. It was the methodology that really bothered me.
Some of the people who were opposed to what we were doing many years ago.
Manipulating things, and this is a case where our manipulations have seemed to work out very well.
And I'm also very proud to say that some of those people who questioned us in the past, they've come back to us and said, you did achieve what you said you were going to do, and thank you for doing it.
About a year after the mission was accomplished, Mr. Gallipo called me and asked me to come down and visit. I thought that was a really nice way to say that when all was said and done, that we were both trying to accomplish the same thing. The islands are a treasure and need to be preserved in some way, shape, or form.
This restoration effort was a kind of miracle. In fact, it worked. Removed the invasive species, reintroduced the natives, all is well.
The dark water. It is an amazing journey. Seeing our children, seeing my children. My youngest daughter will be a paddler in dark water. This is her first time as the first paddler out. And so to do that at night, it's an amazing thing. It's a very proud moment for me. And I just am trying to make sure every scenario is taken care of.
Paddles up. On you, Eva. On the right. Go. Get on the ball.
Most of these times on journeys, when we cross, we usually have the bioluminescent effect. And so when your paddle hits the water, it explodes with light. So each time all your paddles hit the water, that whole side of the boat lights up. And any sea animal that's in the water that's wanting to see what you're like, they go shooting by and you see it light up in the water. You hear stuff splash out of the water, big stuff splash out of the water at night. Keep paddling. And our journey is one that really helps us as a community, as a tribal group, remember who we are and remember our ancestors. It's the most dangerous time, it's the most spiritual time. Aku muptmai pishke ep utashka alish shupupushka alish. Greetings in my language and my name, my traditional name, meaning memories.
I will say the canoe medicine, because that's how we talk about it, was put to sleep by one of our ancestors around 1834 because the mission system had really destroyed that culture.
Really, the definition of Tamol is the house of the sea. That's how we look at it. This is our place. This is where it takes care of us and gets us one village to the other, brings all our food in. You know, if you had a Tamol in your village, you were a well-off village.
It was the 1850s when the last Tamols were being manufactured. And because of Fernando Librado, who was interviewed by John Harrington, we know how they were made.
They would gather redwood, driftwood on the beaches and they would cut them into planks. And then they would drill holes into them where they would then thatch them with cordage. And then they would caulk all the holes in with asphaltum.
You can tell who built a Tamol by the size of the hand. This is the identity of the Tamol builder from village to village. I mean, just probably had huge hands. My Tamol would have been small, I think. We're blessed in '76 to have a Tamol built by Peter Howarth and the reestablishment of the Brotherhood of Tamol, and them actually taking that boat out to the islands and paddling around the islands. That was a wonderful feature, but still, it was not complete.
I've always known that I was Chumash, but I never really embraced it. Didn't really have a sense of family, just feeling really scattered. But I've always been really connected to the ocean. I went to the Coastal Band Chumash Nation council meeting, and I was reluctant to do that because I felt nervous. And they welcomed me with open arms and told me about the paddle,
which is always a scheduled annual channel crossing from Channel Islands Harbor to Scorpion Harbor on Santa Cruz Island, which as the crow flies is 20 miles.
It's been a little over 150 years, and we restarted the tradition of crossing in '01.
Today, our paddle practice is called a village hop. So we started at the Bacara, which is our village of El Apunice, to Ledbetter, which is our village of Siuxton.
Santa Barbara Channel is known as being very dangerous. And if all of these other kind of power boats struggle in this channel, a canoe will struggle in this channel.
For me, because I'm new to all of this, you can feel the sense of urgency just trying to get from one thing to the next, like trying to make it through the surf. Now you're out of the surf and now you're in the open ocean and you're wanting to stay positioned so that the swells don't capsize and start coming over the side of the Tamol.
Several years ago, we had to worry about the shipping lanes. But the biggest issues we've been having is climatic change. We have definitely noticed the climatic change over the last 5 years, and so we can't cross over without getting caught up with two different confluences of currents coming up through the channel. 4 years ago, I believe, we got actually swamped. Just a huge wave came over the boat, and she was done. She's just filled with water. Again, a valuable lesson we learned: she doesn't sink. So yeah, that's why the training.
Some paddles up! Paddles up! Keep rolling! Come on! Oh!
Keep somebody paddling, and somebody's going to be bumping. Training again is to know what you have of your equipment in your vessel. You got to make sure everybody knows how to use it, and so to do it, you make the new people bail out water.
Paddling, you guys! Keep paddling!
You can't simulate it until you just do it, and when she takes water on, people better know how to get it out.
I took a little bit of a nap there on the ground for a while and got some rest. It's been a long night.
really looking forward to it. I'm out with my son. He's been coming out here since he was 7 years old.
I feel really proud right now and just ready to get in the Tollemache and start pulling hard.
First crossing, so we were actually by the arch. And as we go in between the two islands from Anacapa over to Santa Cruz, we had some problems getting across that potato patch, the confluence of waters coming across. We actually started taking in water quite a bit. And at that point, we were paddling with 5 paddlers. First thing we did is remove the biggest paddler out, when she was like 250, and you're out of there. Boat rose up a bit. She started to loosen up. Then we threw out sandbags. We had to throw probably about 8 sandbags out. Rose up a little bit more. She's still taking on water. Lessons learned the hard way. Oh, God.
Every pool is a prayer. We do that, and that's why it's so important. A lot of us have lost the roots. And what we do today is to kind of remind people where we're at. Kind of saying that, you know what, don't forget the past.
We have our legends of creation, and the islands, the Channel Islands, were where we originally started.
One splash, one paddle.
Legends have it, we occupied the mainland here through the use of the Rainbow Bridge. And that story tells us our relationship, our symbiotic relationship with the ocean. Our Creator made sure that in case anything happened as we crossed from the islands to the mainland, if we fell off as we looked down, that we wouldn't perish. We'd simply evolve, and thus we'd become very close to the Eloquoy, the dolphin.
It's a huge thing for me because I've never been there. Nobody in my family, in my immediate family, especially from the Chumash side, nobody's ever been there that I know of. I've never spoke of it, so it's going to be a powerful spiritual experience.
There's probably 300 people on the beach itself. You're seeing sage smoking, you're seeing songs and cheers, and you're actually crying because you're part of it. You actually feel that.
The Tollemache is a powerful symbol of revitalization. It brings us all together.
I look forward to approaching Limu and being able to carry the Tollemache up that rocky beach shore as a crew. It's so much more than what I thought it would be, more than I could ever imagine, more than I was prepared for.
It helps us teach our kids about the ocean, our connection to the ocean, our connection to the islands.
Life-changing. Wasn't what I expected, but it was everything that I needed.
This is the most family I've ever had. Really grateful. Empty on the inside. It's being filled.
I only paddle as hard as I do because I want him to know how much he means to me and how much he's taught me too. And I hope it shows.
This journey's been done for a long time. There's no deviation from it. It's been going on for a long time, and that's the only way I can express that. Because I wasn't the first one, I'm just following footsteps. I'm just fortunate to be able to tell you this is how these footsteps go.